This video was brought to you by my loyal patrons. Pledge today and receive exclusive perks. Link in the description.
Dear Christopher, here is your friend Thomas the Tank Engine. He wanted to come out of his station yard and see the world. These stories tell you how he did it.
Welcome back, folks. We are now within the bowels of the hit era of Thomas, and with one all-model season to go. Season 11 and the Great Discovery. The big final goodbye to the traditional all-model production of Thomas and Friends before the switch to CGI. Is Season 11 the grand send-off this 23-year run of the series deserves? Well, let's dive on in and find out. Season 11 is the final season of Thomas to be an all-model production. The year was 2007. As the world was beginning to move into the age of high definition at the time, it was time for Thomas to get a quality boost. So the production team ditched the cameras used in seasons 8 to 10, and season 11 was the first shot in 1080p high definition using Sony CyberShot HD cameras. For this, they redid everything to coincide, including the intro, the Island of Sodor opening bit, the end credits, every shot for the engine roll call, etc. Like most seasons, Season 11 had 26 slated episodes. There were 6 narrow-gauge focused ones that did not air with the other 20 originally. These were produced separately and were held off to be put onto home media through a special DVD in 2008, Engines and Escapades. A completely narrow-gauge focused DVD, even featuring an exclusive song all about them. All 26 episodes were released together, however, on one DVD when the complete Series 11 was put out in 2010. Like Season 9 with Calling All Engines before, this season was shot alongside production of the movie The Great Discovery. Unlike Calling All Engines though, The Great Discovery takes place after the season, and was meant to be a sort of grand celebrational finale bookend to Thomas's tenure as an all-model production. We'll talk more about this movie later. Now, Season 11 is pretty notorious for its vast amount of reshoots that occurred during filming. Most of the reshoots have gone unreleased, though strangely, 5 episodes were aired on TV in 2007 with the original footage intact. These include Hide and Peep, Hector the Horrid, Dirty Work, Thomas and the Spaceship, and Don't Be Silly Billy. None of these original versions of the episodes were released officially on home media, and the only way to view them is through archived broadcast recordings. You might have noticed that Thomas's chuffing sounds are out of sync in this scene from Hector the Horrid.
Hector lay on his side looking very sad. Now Hector didn't seem so horrid.
That's because the sound effects were synced to the original footage that they shot in the first cut.
Hector lay on his side looking very sad. Now Hector didn't seem so horrid.
When they swapped the shot for the new one, it wasn't synced right. Some of the reshoots are completely different angles than the originals, such as this one from Thomas and the Spaceship, and this one from Don't Be Silly Billy. Some photos taken during the original shoot reveal some set differences between versions, and also reveal that some of the original shoots never made it to air. There's also plenty of scenes that are a mishmash of original and reshoot shots, such as this scene from Smoke and Mirrors. Note how Big Mickey's crane hook changes position and length between cuts. Season 11 was shot in 3 parts. The initial standard gauge shoot, which contained all the footage that was featured in the original airings of the episodes, the narrow gauge shoot for the 6 Engines and Escapades episodes, and all the scenes for the Great Discovery that featured the narrow gauge engines, and then all the standard gauge stuff for the Great Discovery. All the reshoots occurred during this 3rd part, during the Great Discovery shoot, and the big tell is Thomas's lamp. Thomas's lamp lens on his brass prop is more clear in the original Season 11 footage, and more muddy and gray in the Great Discovery and reshoot shots. Some sets were combined during these reshoots to speed up filming. This behind-the-scenes photo shows that Knapford Station and Callan Castle were built on the same set, and by using clever angles, hide each other from view of the camera. There is no official reason online confirming why so much was reshot later on, at least as far as I could find. Seems like a lot of wasted time and money for something that seemed just fine in the original versions. All of the reshot scenes appear to have no rhyme or reason to them, and seem to be totally random. Some have speculated that every shot that they had to redo was shot on a standard definition camera originally, and they switched to an HD one partway through the season. Though frankly, I'm not convinced of that. Another theory is that the footage was reshot because the originals were filmed in 4:3, which I also don't believe, since Thomas has been consistently filmed in 16:9 since 2003. Fellow fans, Special Trees, helped me out greatly by providing a little more insight to all of these reshoots, and he has a great video on his channel showing all the differences between versions. So go check that out if you're interested in seeing all of what was changed. Link in the description. Season 11 was originally going to be the final season narrated by series veterans Michael Angelis and Michael Brandon for the UK and US respectively. HIT wanted to bring in another A-list celebrity to narrate the series, starting with The Great Discovery. And their first choice was, you ready for this? Gwyneth Paltrow, of all people. This would have marked the first female narrator of the series in the English dub. I don't know why they wanted her of all people. Was Paltrow in 2007 known for narrating or something? And I don't know what the thought process of having an American woman be the narrator of the British dub of the show was, but nonetheless, it never happened. Negotiations with her did not end with an agreement, so HIT sought out someone else. And who they found was Pierce Brosnan. Pierce Brosnan, James Bond himself, was signed aboard and was to take over the role of narrator starting with The Great Discovery, marking the first time both Britain and America had the same narrator since Ringo Starr back in the 80s. Pierce, with 5 children of his own, was very familiar with Thomas, and that he had read the books to his kids at bedtime.
I've spent many years narrating these stories to my own children, and I have 5 children. So I'm fairly versed in the character of Thomas.
When approached by HIT, he took the job happily. We'll talk more about Pierce later in the video, and more about his swift departure from the show next time, when we get to Season 12. Okay, so before we start, let's address the big ugly yellow elephant in the room. Season 11, for some reason, has this ugly yellow tint across all of its footage, like someone in the editing room laid a yellow overlay across the files on the timeline. It's the most atrocious in the winter episodes, where the snow actually looks yellow and warm. Ugh, it's disgusting. What is this yellow tint from exactly? Is this just the color temperature of the new HD cameras? See, I thought that, but then Season 12, which uses the same cameras as far as I know, the colors are way more natural again, so I have no idea what happened. Let's just go ahead and color correct that yellow tint the best we can. There we go. Much better. Now that I can look at the season without feeling sick, let's talk visuals. Just like the rest of the HIT era, Season 11 is fairly mid-looking when it comes to the designs of most of its sets. The majority of the standard gauge mainline sets are just as dull as ever, with seemingly even more green overgrowth hiding everything. With every passing season, the island of Sodor looks more and more post-apocalyptic. However, I will note that those hilly backdrops that were so underused in the previous seasons appear to make a comeback this year. I spotted them multiple times on various sets, and they help so much in giving these locations implied distance. I'll also say I see more of an effort when it came to the narrow gauge stuff this year. The mountain sets in particular are quite impressive. There's a nice feeling of depth and height with some of these, especially on those hilly road sets that they have Madge travel on. Once again, those mountain backdrops to imply distance do so much in making it feel like we're really high up somewhere. The colors and lighting in general look better than before. The shadows are quite a bit more contrasty than we've come to see in the previous hit seasons, and the characters' faces have a little more definition shown. The lighting isn't as soft as it usually is, and I think that makes all the difference in helping make these visuals look more convincing. Season 11, after the yellow tint is removed anyway, is probably the best looking of the hit seasons, in my opinion. Several secondary characters get time in the spotlight again. No lead roles or anything, but there seems to have been a push to expand the cast more. Cranky the Crane, for instance, gets a big role in the season's opener, as do Donald and Douglas in the following episode. Spencer, Elizabeth, Arthur, Salty, Bill, and Ben all show up in multiple episodes. Even Alicia Bhatti returns. That's pretty cool. The episode Thomas Sets Sail is kinda neat, for the majority of its supporting cast is all made up of female characters. The characters that Thomas passes include Emily, Elizabeth, Rosie, and Molly. Pretty cool, and I wonder how intentional that was. This is very much a season that's front-loaded with its strongest episodes, and then it all kinda turns to shit as it goes on. By the time I got to episode 14 or so, I knew there was nothing else to really look forward to. I looked at that episode list, and I groaned. The really good episodes the season is known for, like Cool Truckings, Gordon and the Engineer, Emily's Rubbish, etc., are all at the start. After, episode 8, it's all downhill, and the season becomes as formulaic as ever. The amount of episodes this year that deal with an engine putting off a job or forgetting to do their job because something else is more interesting to them are so numerous that it's actually ridiculous. We have an episode where Duncan is given a job to do, but puts it off to do other jobs that are more exciting. And then directly after that one, we have an episode where Percy is given a job to do, but he puts it off to do other jobs that are more exciting. My god, they didn't even try to hide the fact these are both virtually the same plot. And they're right next to each other. Come on! No one remembers these seasons fondly, and this is clearly why. They are just so routine. And speaking of which, I am so sick of the Thomas is sent to do something and he messes it up plots. That is nearly every episode of his this year. You want to know how many exactly? 7. 7 of these cookie cutter plots. Thomas Sets Sail, Thomas and the Lighthouse, Smoke and Mirrors, Thomas and the Runaway Car, Thomas and the Big Bang, Thomas in Trouble, and Thomas and the Stinky Cheese. Thomas and the Lighthouse is probably the worst of the bunch, as it's just the same thing over and over again. Thomas passes 5 different characters doing a job more exciting than him, and each time he gets more distracted until he hits a thing and breaks his load. Gee, didn't see that coming. Enough with the plots though. Let's talk about some other oddities. Engines are still running light engine constantly and stop in the middle of nowhere. This has not improved from season 10. In fact, I'd say it's gotten worse. Time after time again, engines come across others that are just stopped in the middle of nowhere by themselves with no trains. The weirdest is probably Molly's appearance in Thomas Sets Sail. She's just stopped in the middle of the main line. Why is she there? They couldn't have placed a water tower or a signal or something to make some sense of it? Or given her some trucks to pull? Anything? No one cared? Really? Something else I noticed that kept recurring this year is the way the crashes are filmed. Have you all noticed how almost all the crashes this season are filmed from behind? Or are far away from the camera?
And he biffed right into his lucky trucks. He bashed into the barrier. They crashed through a snowbank. And biffed his trucks in surprise.
It's weird, right? It's not every single one or anything, but it happened enough times to seem like a pattern. If I had to guess, this was probably intentional to lessen how violent they are. Now, I know I'm going to come off as nitpicking here, but there is quite a big lack of new score this season. I was trying to listen for new themes as I watched, and I think nearly every piece of music this season is reused from a previous season. Madge's theme is the main theme from Toby's New Shed.
Madge? is a snub-nosed lorry. She drives around the mountains and valleys, delivering goods to the villagers.
This sad theme in Spaceship is pulled from Calling All Engines.
The Fat Controller will be cross, sighed Thomas. I've spent all night looking for Percy's spaceship. And the airport is only half finished, wheezed Thomas.
The theme used for Sir Handel is Fergus's from all the way back in season 7.
Sir Handel is one of the oldest engines in the hills of Sodor.
One day he was on his way to the quarry. He had a special job to do for Sir Topham Hatt. Hello, whistled Thomas.
I don't even really like the hit era, and I could place all of this. Hector's theme is all new, and there's obviously new little cues here and there, of course. But is that it? There's a few times where the reused music doesn't line up with what's happening on screen. Like here, in Smoke and Mirrors, they use that Thomas Going Fast theme, which I think was pulled straight from Sticky Toffee Thomas from last year. In that episode, when Thomas is going through the overgrown track, there's this funny trombone cue that plays when it cuts to how ridiculous he looks.
But Thomas puffed carefully on. He knew he was late. So now he wasn't thinking about fancy dress. He was only thinking about getting to the party on time.
Then the theme gets reused here, and when that funny little cue shows up, it doesn't correspond with anything.
Next, Thomas chuffed to Maron Station. Red carpet, he puffed to himself.
It just kind of feels out of place. I'm not trying to say reusing music from previous seasons is a bad thing. It's not a new thing by any means. But usually when a theme gets reused, it is retooled slightly to align with beats in the story. There's usually a variety of all new stuff too to expand the library and give each season its own unique feel. Not really the case this year. The score feels very thrown together this year in a way that it never has in previous seasons. And I wonder if the reason for that is because all of Ed Welch and Robert Hartshorn's efforts were going into the Great Discovery at the time. It might also explain why Season 11 shockingly had only one new music video produced for it. Perhaps all the real work was going into the movie instead. Regarding the narrators, I don't have much to say. Michael Angelis is fine. Sounds really no different than he has in the last few seasons. He kept doing that gruff kind of voice for so many characters though, and it kind of started getting to me after a while.
We can pull a heavy train. We're very strong. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do have lucky trucks, he puffed. I'm a new truck, and I'm scared because I haven't been filled with coal before.
I do appreciate the accents that he gave to some of the characters, specifically Billy.
Thomas, you're not a bossy boiler. You're a really useful engine, and I really enjoyed working with you.
Now, Michael Brandon, maybe I'm just getting used to him from this rewatch, but I don't think he was terrible or anything this year. He was fine. He still does all the annoying nasally voices for Scarloey and the bunch, and oh come on man, what is that Henry voice?
Now I will always be on time, puffed Henry, and that means I can be a really useful engine.
Guess Henry's been hanging out with Oliver, His roar for Hector trumps Angelus's though.
Keep away, he roared.
Keep away! He bellowed.
And I just love how silly his delivery is here.
Thomas got ready with his whistle. The little engines got ready too.
It's just so silly. How can you not love that? Now, it would not be a retrospective of a hit season without my arbitrary list of random observations. What's going on with Thomas's eyes in Dream On here? These appear to be digitally edited. I wonder why. Emily isn't coupled to her coaches here. They use nearly identical shots of Cranky in 2 different episodes, here in Hide and Peep, and here in Thomas Set Sail. They also use weirdly similar shots of Thomas at the ship dock in 2 different episodes, here when he's talking to the storyteller, and here in Smoke and Mirrors when he's talking to Topham. They used the Gauge 3 Thomas for this shot of his bunker being loaded. Note how much closer to the chute he is than in the previous shot. And they also call it a coal box for some reason.
Black, dusty coal poured into Thomas's coal box.
The storyteller is edited into these shots of her poking out of Thomas's cab. Again, once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. I like that they use Butch to launch the sailboat. That's kind of clever. This farmer has an unrepainted head from season 4. You can tell because his pupils aren't scary huge like everyone else's. Skarloey and Rheneas are literally wearing the same face in this scene. Like the crew members took it off Rheneas and then put it on Skarloey for his shots. Did they not realize that they were different characters? What was the thought process here? The lighthouse keeper is Cyril. That's kind of cool. Looks like he directs both engines and ships in heavy fog. They used the original Perspex Henry body connected to the new brass tender in this episode, and the difference in their color is so blatant here. The tender looks neon compared to him.
And later, when the refreshments lady laid out a very special tea...
Oh, that's neat. The refreshment lady appeared and got mentioned. I like how Freddy tries to leave the wharf before anyone can see him, but, like, Mac can. He's looking right at him. Thomas's flatbed disappears between shots here. Watch.
Thomas bumped into Bert, the stinky cheese shot into the air, and splattered down.
Where'd the flatbed go? They used the same shot twice here. Look.
But he knew he had to carry on. Must get to the docks, he chuffed. Even though his friends could smell the stinky cheese.
Wow, did they really not have another clip to use here? There is not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5 instances of characters getting covered in mud this year. Ew, it's in his eyes! This happened a bit too often that it's a little sus. Someone on the crew have a mud fetish or something?
You are also to collect the Dowager Hatch luggage from Maythwaite Station.
Why does Topham call his own mom the Dowager? That's so weird. This show is so robotic sometimes. Talk about an abrupt change in quality. After the drawn-out, repetitive, dull experience of Season 11, watching The Great Discovery right after gave me an immediate boost of serotonin. This will be one of the rare times in the Retrospective series where we cover the special after the season's overview. For this is, I think, the only time the connected special takes place after the season. Usually the special kicks off the season, but not this time, for The Great Discovery is Model Thomas's Endgame. This movie revolves around Thomas getting lost and stumbling across an abandoned town in the mountains called Great Waterton. Upon its rediscovery, Sir Topham Hatt wants it rebuilt and puts Thomas in charge of the job. Thomas takes great pride in his new position, but grows jealous of a new engine called Stanley, who arrives to cover his usual work. Stanley becomes popular with the others, and Thomas becomes insecure about being pushed aside. He decides to knock Stanley down a peg by giving him too many trucks one day. However, this backfires when the trucks break away and demolish the tower in Great Waterton. This severely delays reconstruction and turns everyone's opinions of Thomas south once the truth comes out. Thomas tries to make it up to everyone by working late hours, and this leads to him getting stuck in a mine and having a terrible tumble. With Thomas missing, all work stops as the search begins. Stanley is the one who finds Thomas and rescues him. The two make amends and help each other. With everyone safe again, reconstruction resumes, and Great Waterton is restored in time for Sodor Day. The movie's original title, Leader of the Track, remains in the form of the final line said by Thomas at the very end of the movie.
He had wanted to be the leader of the track. But we're all leaders of the track, puffed Thomas proudly. And he couldn't have been happier.
This movie was made to celebrate and mark the end of the series being an all-model production in a grand way, because for Season 12 onwards, elements of CGI would be brought in to animate the engine's faces and people. As a sort of last hurrah, so many characters from across the series were dug out and given some time in the spotlight. All the narrow gauge engines appear here, several of the secondary characters, even Diesel Tang gets a quick blink and you'll miss it cameo in the back. They saw this as an opportunity to dig out the pack characters again, and they were worked into the story to help out with the reconstruction of the town. I think this notion to kind of bring back all the characters was also worked into Season 11 to some degree, considering all of the secondaries that we saw get focus. I love that this movie used the opportunity to give us a little lore about the island of Sodor's beginnings, filling us in on what life was like back then.
When steam engines first came to Sodor, this was the main town. It was called Great Waterton. The waterworks here provided water for everyone.
Pierce Brosnan, as narrator, is such a breath of fresh air from the two Michaels. While he's not my favorite narrator or anything, I do think his narration style works perfectly for this era of the show. I really appreciate his attempt at all the different voices and accents for the characters.
Mr. Percival says that because you mainline engines don't know the tracks in the hills. Restoration. That is when you make something very old look new again. No one knows where he is, whistled Emily.
I particularly love that smug, posh type of voice that he gives James.
I've just met the new engine. He's called Stanley. He's very friendly. Everyone likes him.
There's a sort of quietness to Pierce's narration, almost like he's speaking softly, reading it as a bedtime story to a child.
Thomas felt terrible. He knew why he'd done it, but he couldn't tell the Fat Controller and the other engines. He felt too ashamed, so he said nothing.
He says as much in his interview.
I sit in this booth, and I have the story in front of me, and I basically tell the story, as if I was talking to my own son or daughter, who's 4 or 5. And you try to have as much of an intimate relationship with your voice and the person or the people, the children, the parents who are listening to you.
And it works perfectly, especially in this era of the show where the stories were more tailored to younger kids than before.
And Neville is what? Is he?
He is in many regards similar to Thomas. He's new to Sodor.
In the behind-the-scenes interview with him, you see him asking about what type of personality each character has, so he knows how to deliver a voice for them. Even for nothing characters like Neville, he took care and showed a genuine respect for the series and its characters. We respect both of the Michaels for their long work on the show, of course, but you can tell in their inconsistent performances during these later years that they were really starting to not really care as time went on.
And that means I can be a really useful engine.
And that means I can be a really useful engine.
While the initial reception to Pierce from general audiences was a bit mixed, I personally think he was the perfect change-up that the show needed at this time. The set design here is also notably impressive, a real step up from what we usually see in the hit era. The overgrown abandoned town looks great, all the mountainy locations are so grand looking, and the whole mine scene in general is really well done. So much work went into these stunt sets that only appear on screen for a couple seconds each. Compared to the humdrum Season 11, it's clear to see where everyone's efforts truly went this year. Just like in Calling All Engines before, the songs in this movie are all severely catchy. Jobs Aplenty lives rent-free in my head daily. Unlike Calling All Engines, most of the songs actually have a point this time. They're not simply just recaps of what we just saw and interrupt the flow of the story. They are more organically worked into the story. Jobs Aplenty is used as a montage to show the reconstruction of Great Waterton, and Where Oh Where Is Thomas is a montage showing the grand search for Thomas. Musical numbers are an efficient way to show the passage of time quickly, used to great effect here. The only exception is Thomas and James are racing, which does not have a point at all, considering the race really meant nothing in the grand scheme of the story. Still pretty catchy though. The grand finale song, Thomas You're the Leader, is a first for the series, transitioning into a new era of rock and rap styled songs with a lead singer. The first song to not feature a child chorus, and is sung by Chris Maiden. While I think it gets a little repetitive towards the end, I think it totally works as a swan song for the model era of the show. A grand musical goodbye to this era. And speaking of which, I also want to quickly note how much I appreciate the movie isn't bogged down in learning segments sprinkled throughout, like Calling All Engines was. They did indeed produce some for it, but they had the restraint to make them simply bonus features on the DVD, so to not interrupt the story for them. I'm very happy that they did that. All of this stuff is great, but what I think I love about The Great Discovery the most is the fact it's completely a Thomas story. Magic Railroad pushed Thomas and the engines aside in favor of a human-driven plot, and Colonel Engines was an ensemble cast. The Great Discovery, though, is a far more grounded, personal story about Thomas and his struggles with his own ego. We're so used to the oblivious, childlike, naive, frankly stupid side of Thomas that gets run into the ground in the Hit-era episodes. But here is a story that deals with an internal struggle. Thomas's discovery of the town and being put in charge of the work gives him a big head. He clearly wants to do a good job and make Topham proud. All of that unravels, though, when Stanley arrives and proves to be popular with the others while doing Thomas's usual work. Thomas feels threatened by Stanley's presence, and this is what pushes him to play a trick on him. And that all results in the others shunning him. The tragedy of it all is that Thomas brought it all onto himself. It wasn't like there was a misunderstanding or something and he has to clear his name. No, he actually pretty much deserved what he got here. Pride and ego are Thomas's fundamental flaw here, and I think this is what makes the story work so well. This is such a far cry from the usual Thomas doesn't deliver the thing because he was distracted or whatever types of stories that we're so used to with him. No, this movie is about Thomas dealing with pride, envy, vulnerability, reputational damage, obsolescence, humility, and acceptance. It's a fun little character study of our show's main character, and the whole movie is properly structured around this single arc. There are no B-plots or cuts to other characters doing things. Our undivided attention, for the most part, never deters from Thomas. The movie is very focused as a result, and tells a clear, conclusive story. As much as I like The Great Discovery, it isn't perfect, and isn't without flaw. It drags quite a bit during the middle. They set up Duncan early on, and his trick on Thomas is what kicks off the plot, but he weirdly never comes back into the story at all, and we basically just forget about him. Some sort of payoff with him later on would have been nice. And while it's a pretty fun scene, I don't really get why Thomas's big crash in the mine had to be so over the top. Like, really, what purpose did him falling off a cliff onto a raft and then floating down a flooded mine really serve? The passage of time implies he was on that raft for several days. It's nighttime when he enters the mine, and midday when he finally exits it. How long is this river? Couldn't he have just crashed through the mine blockage, out onto the mountainside, and tumbled down it? And then he sits at the bottom in that field for several days until he's found? Was the whole water part really necessary? All in all, though, The Great Discovery is a pretty damn good Thomas movie. It hits all the right marks for me, and it's a wonderful send-off to Model Thomas. Unlike the previous couple seasons, Season 11 is sort of a everyone gets one type of season, unless you're Thomas, of course. In third place are all the characters that tied with only one lead each, including Emily, Henry, Toby, Edward, Scarloey, Freddie, Sir Handel, Whiff, Billy, and Hector. And in second place is a tie between all the characters with 2 leads each. This includes Percy, Gordon, James, Duncan, and Madge. Nice to see a new character appear more than once. And in first place, to no one's shock, is Thomas yet again. 13 leads, as if anyone's surprised by that at this point. Let's talk about this year's newbies, and we'll start with the good ones. First up is Madge, the snub-nosed Lori, and I really like Madge. It's been a while since they introduced a new road character, and I like how this is one specifically designed to interact with the narrow gauge engines. Madge is introduced with a very specific purpose, a lorry that can carry heavy loads, including engines. It's a gimmick, yes, but it is something totally new that opens up some new storytelling opportunities. Madge totally fits into the Narrow Gauge's gang, but I might argue that she only really works within the hit era. Skarloey and the others are all in their baby trains phase of the show, all being written as young children in need of some sort of mentor type, and Madge assumes that role pretty well, looking over them and making sure that they stay in line. Once we get to the CGI stuff, where the Skarloey engines start being written correctly again, as older and wiser, Madge kinda becomes redundant. They don't really need a mother type to watch them. It's a shame that Madge's run in the show was so short-lived, only appearing in this season and The Great Discovery. I would have liked to see her in CGI regardless, and how those writers would have handled her. The next is Hector, our first new truck character since... Scruffy back in Season 4? Wow, it's been a while. Hector, which is a clever acronym for Heavily Engineered Coal Truck on Rails, that's such a bizarre piece of trivia, and I cannot believe it's never mentioned in the episode, is pretty interesting, and I love how he was introduced. In his debut episode, we are presented to Hector for the first time, bullying Bill and Ben. I love that they used Bill and Ben here, using the smallest engines they could to really emphasize Hector's big size. He's picking on the children, so to speak, so we, the audience, don't like him immediately. The trucks deem him a king of sorts among them. They swarm around him, like bees swarming around their queen. It's revealed later in the episode that because Hector was new, he's never been filled with coal before, and didn't want to be touched, effectively transforming this menace into this sad lump that we feel bad for. Thomas helps him conquer his fear, and Hector kind of becomes a big teddy bear at the end. Not such a horror character at all. He actually had a pretty nice arc. Hector was handled really well, I thought, and his debut episode is one of the season's highlights for sure. Again, though, it's a real shame that they barely used him again after this. Billy is introduced this year, and he very clearly has the same design philosophy as Rosie from last year. He was designed to be the token orange train on the store shelves, and they made him look as much like a simple toy as possible. I have nothing to say about Billy, really. I don't think his character is interesting at all, and he was clearly never meant to go far. He exists. And then we have Whiff, who I do actually like the concept of. This really outgoing, nerdy engine who is tasked with the most undesirable of jobs ever, collecting garbage.
My name's Whiff because I'm a bit smelly. You're going to help me collect rubbish.
But he doesn't get discouraged and genuinely loves the work he does. He's just a little hard to be around is all. He's an outcast character, and doesn't fall into the trappings of, oh, I'm depressed because everyone hates me because of my job, kind of tropes. No, he's really happy doing what he does. And that enthusiasm he maintains in the face of ridicule is very admirable and refreshing.
Who's your messy new friend with the funny whistle, Emily? My name's Whiff, whistled Whiff. It suits you.
What I find strange about Whiff, though, is his basis choice. They chose a very unique engine, Aerolite, built to haul the Northeastern Railway's chief mechanical engineer in a saloon coach. A very prestigious job. And yet, the character designers looked at this and thought, garbage engine. I don't know why. Is it some sort of inside joke? I don't get it. Wouldn't some sort of industrial, like a Barclay or something, have been way more appropriate for this? It'd be one thing if this strange choice was intentional and was worked into Whiff's character somehow. Like, he thought doing prestigious inspection work was boring and never suited him, and he found out later in his life that he enjoyed doing manual labor where he could get his buffers dirty or something. Like a twist on the riches to rags type of arc or something. But this is the hit era. So of course, they would never bother to write anything that clever. No one is allowed to have backstories here. These characters are only here to sell toys, don't you know? Speaking of weird basis choices, let's talk about Stanley. Now, I really like Stanley, and I think the role that he played in The Great Discovery was really nice. But I can't help but feel there was something lost in translation between script and design team. Stanley is described as shinier, bigger, and stronger than Thomas. Even Henry remarks that Thomas will be jealous.
Oh my, gasped Henry. Whatever will Thomas say?
If Stanley's purpose was to be an imposing threat to Thomas, why did they opt to make him a tiny, ancient saddle tank engine? we can see in the shots where he and Thomas are side by side that Thomas is still quite a bit larger than him. Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, years later, did a very similar concept with Ryan, who was also meant to be an imposing threat to Thomas. And there it works because the engine they chose for him is a lot larger and newer and affable. The more I think about it, though, the more I think I do like Stanley being this non-imposing engine. I think it speaks more to Thomas's arc in the movie, how even the nicest, most well-meaning, non-threatening engine can even still puncture his ego. And you know what? Maybe that was intentional, and I'm just overthinking it. I guess I'm just thrown off by the fact that they explicitly describe him as larger and stronger. What was the point of that? Not to mention, Stanley is kind of similar to Billy in design. You'd think they'd want to make the new characters introduced in the same batch as different from each other as possible. My qualms with Stanley's design aside, I still like him. And I find it so bizarre that despite his popularity following this movie, the show never gave him a lead role in an episode after this. I'm pretty happy that Rosie was used a bit more this season, after only appearing once last year, although she didn't really do that much. The only episode I feel was a good use of her was Hector the Horrid, basically being used as the reason for Thomas finally standing up to Hector. Continuing the big brother little sister thing that they introduced before, Hector scares Rosie, and Thomas's big brother side gets defensive. I wish we got more opportunities to see this dynamic at play. The number of old faces that show up in the season and the movie is pretty wonderful. Problem is, there's just not much to say about them. Donald and Douglas get to play a substantial role in an episode, but there's nothing to really talk about regarding their characters. The same can be said about Spencer, who also plays a big role in an episode. Elizabeth returns, Salty pops up a lot, Bill and Ben appear, etc. It's just nice to see them, really. And at this point, I really miss seeing these characters get spotlight roles. I am so sick of the Steam Team and the narrow gauge engines. Please change it up. I would usually dedicate a small portion to talking about the main characters this year, but I don't have much for them. All of them still exhibit the same tropes and issues that I've discussed at length before. Edward is still out of character, Toby's well into his insecure era, James is vain and learns not to be vain as always, and none of them really do anything of note. Except for two. The first I'll mention is Emily. Now, Emily doesn't do much this year, but I did enjoy her spotlight episode, Emily's Rubbish. In this one, she is assigned to work with newcomer Whiff, but is so embarrassed by being seen with such a nerd. The episode itself is pretty funny, and I like seeing an Emily episode that didn't default to her being bossy and standoffish. I like that side of her, don't get me wrong, but this time we got to see one that deals with her vulnerabilities and insecurities. It's a nice change. I don't think we've seen Emily in this light since, season 8. And the other of note is Gordon. As always, Gordon is one of the strongest characters in the hit era, leading in the era's best episodes. Gordon and the Engineer this year was a big standout, and season 11 just might be Gordon in his most pleasant form yet. We're pretty used to the more grumpy, pompous jerk Gordon who gets what he deserves in the end, especially in the hit era. But in season 11, Gordon's actually kinda cool. I don't think that's put on display more than in his friendship with Thomas this year. Now, the two have always had a bit of a rivalry, dating all the way back to season 1. But this season, they're pretty chill with each other, and they have each other's backs. In Gordon and the Engineer, Thomas suggests the idea to go back to get the Engineer, to which Gordon agrees.
Maybe you could go on my line? That's a good idea. Thank you, Thomas.
In episodes like Spaceship and Runaway Car, Gordon is snooty at first, but both times after seeing Thomas in distress, he steps up and helps him. He even shows some real remorse when he spots Thomas broken down in Thomas in Trouble, but can't stop to help him.
Sorry, Thomas. I'm a guaranteed connection.
I do get the impression that if he weren't pulling the express in that moment, he probably would have. Gordon really feels like a chill big brother looking out for his little bro this year, and I love seeing this side of him. There is good in Gordon. He's not just an asshole all the time. He is still the pompous Gordon that we know, though. I actually quite like this moment in Emily's Rubbish when the big three all chuckle at Emily and Whiff.
We smelt you coming for miles.
The hit era got a lot wrong, but somehow Gordon was one of the few things that they really knew how to handle. As for MVP, well, it's kind of hard to deny who was the real star this year. It took 11 seasons for him to get it, but finally, Thomas has gotten his award. I won't lie, The Great Discovery pulled most of the weight here. As we already discussed, Thomas's arc in that movie is simply wonderful. Some of you might say it's a little unfair to give it to him based on that, but this review is covering the season and the movie together, so we gotta consider both. In the season itself, I'd say Thomas is pretty all over the place, with a large share of dumb, formulaic stories. He had a few standout moments, though, that shouldn't be overlooked. Hector the Horrid is his best episode of the season, without a doubt, defending Rosie and helping Hector conquer his fear. He's pretty admirable in Thomas and the Storyteller too, putting his goal aside to help his friends in need. Thomas is definitely overused in these seasons, and it's really easy to get tired of him, but little moments like these are a nice reminder of why we love him so much. Season 11's standout episode, I think, is pretty obvious. It's Cool Truckings. In a season so formulaic and routine, here's an episode with a concept that has never been done before. After a snowfall blocks the line, Duncan is needed at the transfer yards. He can't get there by rail, so Madge transports him by road. The two end up slipping and sliding on the ice, which of course results in near disaster. Duncan is pure Duncan here, getting into Madge's head like a little devil on her shoulder. There's quite a few little gags and moments in this that make it feel like it's something out of the earlier seasons.
And then the bushes. She even sprayed a policeman. Sorry!
That gag right there felt like something out of a Pack episode. You can tell that they really had fun with this one, and was probably the most fun episode of the whole season to film and build sets for. You can always just tell whenever the crew are given a chance to do something with the roadies, they tend to go all out for it. Thomas and the runaway car, while again pretty formulaic, is also a fun episode that's pretty memorable. It's a classic runaway episode, and kind of gave me Busy Going Backwards vibes. I can so easily imagine the runaway sequence with that classic William Tell overture. I also really like the Thomas and Gordon friendship in this one. Pretty wholesome all around. Now, Season 11 has a lot of dumb episodes, but honestly, my pick for the worst is Sir Handel in Charge. Overlooking the fact Sir Handel is severely out of character here, literally nothing happens through the whole episode. Sir Handel is put in charge for the day, and is instructed to give jobs to engines as he comes across them. He doesn't do this, and instead boasts about his job to everyone that he comes across. Then he realizes nothing's been done, and then he goes to assign the jobs. And that's it. That's the whole episode. It just ends after that. Nothing happens. None of it leads to any sort of climax. Nothing. At least an episode with nothing going on, with a really dumb concept like a balloon following Thomas, is bad enough to be memorable and laugh at. But this one is just nothing. I could not believe how substanceless this one was. With the exception of Cool Truckings, the narrow gauge episodes are especially weak this year. They were never the hit era's strong point or anything, but I could at least point to a select few that I enjoyed from each season. Yeah, not the case this year. I don't think Engines and Escapades was ever anyone's favorite DVD. Many of the Thomas Has to Deliver a Thing episodes are also pretty notably bad this year. Thomas and the Lighthouse is really bad, and Thomas and the Stinky Cheese is also pretty egregious. Gotta love how he ruins an entire shipment of cheese, just for the dairy to conveniently have another one ready for him. And then Topham praises him at the end? I hate these types of episodes so much. As for the sum up, I'll say Silly Billy. I tend to think of this episode when I think of Season 11. It's the season where the Orange Train gets introduced. The good in this episode can be found in things like Salty getting an appearance and being present for the new character's arrival. A secondary getting to be present for something. That's something kinda exclusive to Season 11. The bad comes in the rest of the episode. It's formulaic, it's repetitive, the engines just travel everywhere, light engine, and overall just not very interesting. Season 11 in a nutshell. But as for my favorite, yeah, I'm gonna go with Gordon and the Engineer. I talked about this one in my 10 Hidden Gems of Hit Era Thomas video recently, going over how this one really stands out amongst the rest for utilizing real railway practice and safety precautions. I think the overall concept is pretty clever, honestly. The engines overcoming signals on the fritz by sending each other to the next station in succession to spread a message, like a game of telephone. It's also a Gordon episode, and as we all know, the Gordon ones tend to be the best of the bunch. I do also really love Cool Truckings, and Hector the Horrid also deserves a shout, for I think that's probably the best example of a Thomas meets the new character type of story from this era. The word I would use to describe Season 11 of Thomas and Friends is routine. I really didn't feel like anyone's heart was in this season, and most of these episodes just feel the same. Everything is very routine, very cookie cutter, as we've come to expect by now. If you've seen one Thomas Delivers a Thing episode this year, you've seen them all. In all regards, Season 11 kind of just feels like an afterthought, and all the real effort went into the Great Discovery. While there's a few great standout episodes, and some nice surprises and old faces throughout, you can tell they didn't really care about the main show that much this year. At least, that's the impression I get after watching the season and the movie back to back. As a final season for the traditional all-model Thomas era, this sucks. But thankfully, The Great Discovery delivered, and I would highly recommend you all go watch that, and maybe just skip the season. Was Season 11 better than 10? If we don't count the movie, I'd say they're kind of about the same for me. A couple of gems in a season of mostly the same old. Now, if we're counting the movie, yes, it is a much better viewing experience than 10. The next in the retrospective series is the fever dream that is Season 12. The weird transition where they still use models, but all the faces and people are CGI. I'm really looking forward to covering this one. I do not expect greatness, of course, but I do expect a funny time, because I remember Season 12 being especially bad. If anything though, we'll have a lot to talk about in the production history section of the video. For this pick of the week, I want to recommend a video that's been gaining some traction in the past week. A short documentary called The Thomas and Friends Movie That Almost Happened by Derek Smith. Most of you diehards have likely already seen this and seen it talked about on Twitter or wherever, but for those who have not heard about this, you should definitely check this out. This video outlines the plot details of the mysterious canceled Adventures of Thomas movie from 2009. You know, the gritty World War II Thomas movie fans have wondered about for years. Well, to put it lightly, it wasn't exactly that. And the vision for the film was certainly very different from the Thomas world we're used to. The video is very well made, and I've watched it a couple times now. Truly fascinating stuff. I want this summer to be a productive one, and I have quite a few videos in the works at the moment, including a new Sodor's Finest and some other larger projects. I've outlined my plan for the next couple months on Patreon, and I will be posting updates and clips as these videos progress. So if you'd like to know more, consider pledging today and get a few extra perks. Link in the description. And that is all I've got for you today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Retrospective, and I will see you all in the next one. See ya!